Our next up is Michael O'Leary Jr., who throws a hell of a party. And I actually invited him to be part of the consortium that put this together, so you can blame some of this on him at least. But he's got a monster fiction novel called Tirada. And are you going to be reading from that, Michael? Or?
Yes.
Yes, you're going to be reading some monstrous, it's hard to describe, you'll get it. Michael A. O'Leary Jr.
How's everybody doing? Great. All right. So I'm a substitute reader. I was an organizer and a droid type person for today, but as we had a spot, I will fill it. My work is very dark and gory and bloody and awful. So if you brought your children like I did, they're going to get damaged, like mine. And also in my novel, page 23, for those of you who are aware of it, did not print right. It's all like lumped sideways. So I figured I'd read a section that contained page 23 for those of you who might have missed it if you bought the novel. Kim Peters stood on the bridge connecting 46th Street, Minneapolis with Ford Parkway and St. Paul. The rain had ebbed, leaving a slick sheen on the streets, sidewalks, and piles of multicolored leaves. The Mississippi River churned beneath him, reflecting light pollution from downtown. His tie whipped in the wind, which carried a chill but was otherwise tame for October in Minnesota. The wind also made it difficult to light a cigarette, but after the 10th attempt, it sparked to life. He took a deep drag and leaned onto the rail, his eyes on the rolling water below. For the last week, he had come to this spot each night after closing up his used car dealership in northeast Minneapolis. The first time he'd come, he'd meant to throw himself into the miasma of the river below. His business was failing, and at the age of 46, he had no other prospects for employment. 6 years ago, his mother died and left him a windfall. He was selling cars for Denny Hecker at the time and decided that this was his chance to leave. Like that. Over the ensuing years, he found the difference between selling cars and running a business to be an unbridgeable gulf. At the end of this year, he'd be bankrupt. Funny, he thought, that the fruits of his mother's death had driven him to suicidal lengths. His good looks, the key to so much of what he had done in his past as a salesman, were fading. The abdominal six-pack he held all through his 30s was now a pudgy bulk. His blonde hair was thinning. The smile lines around his eyes looked more like crow's feet. As he shaved every morning, he found the man in the mirror becoming unrecognizable. Who was this old person? He had no idea. His 3 kids with his first wife were either in college or about to be. He had no idea how he would make Warren's next tuition payment. He hadn't spoken to his daughters in months. He'd missed almost every important event of their lives. His second wife died in a car accident just 1 month before his mother died. That marriage had been on the rocks anyway. Standing at her funeral with her sister openly staring him down had caused his eye to tick. The unpleasant details his wife had disclosed to her about their relationship were written large upon her face. Since opening Kim's Auto World, he spared little time from familial relationships. On his first visit to the bridge 7 days ago, the only thing that kept him from jumping into the Mississippi River was a business card. It was a simple yet elegant card that read Victoria Stark's Mystic Guide with a Minneapolis phone number. A tire kicker named Frank had given it to him earlier in the day. As often happened with Kim's customers, they ended up talking for over an hour. At the end of the conversation, Frank had said, "Hey, I took one of her cars last time I was in. Here, you should give her a call. It sounds like you need some guidance right now. She's good, for real." Kim had laughed in a friendly way and said, "Well, like I said, I don't really believe in that stuff, but you're right about needing some guidance." As he stood on the Ford Parkway Bridge that night, he stared at the card and the river. The card was embossed with rich brown ink on expensive rag paper. There was a sense of authenticity to it that had convinced him that in the face of oblivion or psychics, perhaps his stoic skepticism could take a back seat. As an accomplished bullshitter and ruthless manipulator of other people's emotional weaknesses, he expected Victoria to pull all the standard tricks of the trade. At first, she seemed just like he expected. When he finally managed to book an appointment, she made it for a month out. But she called him back an hour later and said she could squeeze him in later that day due to the seriousness of the situation. Her prices were astronomical. This all sounded like a scam from someone claiming to have supernatural knowledge. He told her nothing about himself, but she probably used the same seriousness of the situation line on all the new marks. Still, he had said, "Thanks, see you at 7, as if the words were being slipped out of him without his own will being involved. Oblivion or psychics, his will was long gone. His first interaction with Victoria Starks had been shocking. From the moment she smiled and shook his hand on the porch of her house in the Longfellow neighborhood, he knew that she was the real deal. Her authenticity was palpable. She never asked him a thing about his life, but she mapped it out with stunning detail in the first reading. He cried for an hour on her floor while she drank tea and waited for him to get it together. She scheduled another reading for later in the week and a third the following week. These 2 readings, she cautioned, were vitally important since they were the last she would do for him. When he asked her why, she replied, "That's all the cards have for you." He spent the next few days thinking more deeply about his life than he had since his mother died. Such considerations were painful but refreshing. He returned to the bridge every night since the reading. His chosen suicide site was the best place he could find to think. His final reading was in an hour, and he needed to settle on a question. The previous 2 sessions had concentrated on all the mistakes he'd been making. This session was about the future, which he found much more confounding than the past. He knew his business would fail. He owed over $400,000 in inventory alone. The payments to his facilities were 3 months behind, and the state was threatening to go through his accounts. His house had entered the redemption period of foreclosure. Bankruptcy was the only way out of this mess. But where to go after that? He pitched his cigarette into the Mississippi and walked back to the Minneapolis side. His car was parked in Minnehaha Park. As he stepped from the bridge onto the sidewalk, he bumped into a large man. Excuse me, he began, steadying himself on a handrail. "Hey, Roy, right? You were at my car dealership the other day looking at an Astro van. Funny to run into you here, huh?" Roy, an unkempt, ugly guy whose teeth didn't seem to fit his gums. Roy was an unkempt, ugly guy whose teeth didn't seem to fit in his gums. Kim never forgot a name and a face, but this one was easy. The guy even wore the same oversized trench coat, sweatpants, and t-shirt he'd been wearing a few days ago when he test drove a van but didn't buy it. The salesman and Kim sprang to life. "So, you want to take a closer look at that van tomorrow? I might be able to get you a better stereo put in around the house." Roy frowned and said, "Well, odd to run into you here now, huh? My car died back at the park." He motioned back to the same parking lot where Kim's Lexus sat. "I guess I should have bought that van from you the other day. I just live over the bridge. The walk's not too bad. If they don't tell me, I can get the car tomorrow." Kim, feeling good for no reason at all, said, "Well, let me take a quick look at it. If I can get you a ride, I can get you a ride home if needed. I'm parked in the same lot." Roy's eyebrows lifted. He said, "Well, that'd be great. Thanks." They crossed the street and walked into the parking lot. The 80s Datsun that Roy had been driving the other day sat several spaces away from Kim's car. For its age and vintage, it was a miracle that it ran and wasn't rusted bumper to bumper. But weird luck, Kim thought. He'd nail this sale down for sure. "So, what's wrong with her, Roy?" Roy shrugged and said, "I was turning the corner at Godfrey and 46th and it just died. I managed to coast into the parking lot, but I had to push it into the space. It may be small, but it's heavy as hell." Roy popped the hood and Kim looked inside. For all his years selling cars, he had managed to learn almost nothing about how they worked. He liked to say, "I don't sell cars, I sell the idea of cars." This was one of the oldest tricks in his playbook. "Well, I don't see anything obviously wrong." He shook the battery cable connections, pulled out the dipstick, and replaced it. "Probably something deeper in the engine. There's some oil coming off the heads, but that's not too uncommon in a car this old." He smiled and said, "Why don't I give you a ride home and you can get the thing towed tomorrow when they won't charge you for the night service." Roy just stared at him, which Kim took to mean that he'd breached some kind of personal social code. "I mean, I figured you were walking so you didn't want to call a tow truck." Roy's face was moving as if it were about to sneeze. "Well, I could call a tow if you want. A good friend of mine, Eddie, he doesn't charge too." For the few minutes accompanying the rest of Kim's life, he could not get over how fast Roy moved. One second he was standing there with a contorted face. The next he was a blur of motion that caught Kim up and pulled him deeper into the woods of Minnehaha Park than he could have run in 10 minutes. Kim's glasses flew off his face. When the blur stopped, Roy was larger and uglier, and his teeth were protruding from his mouth. Kim would have screamed, but the thumb of Roy's hand was jammed into his mouth and down his throat. Kim's back was planted against a tree, and his feet dangled 6 inches off the ground. He couldn't quite focus on anything around him besides Roy's face. It was as if his eyes were still trying to process all of the information that had flown past him in the last few seconds. "You have a psychic you visit, right?" Roy asked. The extra few inches of teeth didn't affect his speech at all. The words seemed to form in his throat. His lips didn't even move. Kim just stared at him. He had never moved so fast in his life. Not even an airplane moved that fast. Roy growled, "The psychic! Where is she?" Kim tried to speak, but the clawed thumb in his mouth prevented it. Roy pulled his thumb out of Kim's mouth and said, "Where does she live?" Kim opened his bruised mouth and said, in a panic, he realized he couldn't remember where she lived. Somewhere in Longfellow." Roy grimaced, the bones beneath his face roiling like the water of the Mississippi, and said, "Address!" I can't remember," Kim sputtered. He'd been ready to drive there when he ran into Roy, but now he couldn't get there if a gun was pointed at his head. And this was far worse than a gun. This was insane. Even more insanely, it seemed that Roy believed him. "How did you find her in the first place?" he asked. I had a card with her number on it. It's in my jacket. Then I met her at the Blue Owl before we went back to her place." Deciding that this whole situation was so far out that it couldn't be real, Kim asked, "How did you move like that? Who and what are you?" Roy didn't seem to hear him. He was staring off in the woods, lost in thought. Kim hung there, shocked past fear. His mind didn't know how to process any of this. Eventually, Roy fished Victoria's card out of Kim's pocket. He looked at it for a moment and grinned. Roy's smile broke in the dam of the dam of disbelief that held Kim. Roy's smile broke the dam of disbelief that held Kim together. Oh, he began blubbering. Roy tucked the card into his trench coat, looked into Kim's eyes, and cocked his head. Oh, geez, Roy. Oh, no. Roy grew larger and even more horrifying. The twisted grin on his face followed him through the transformation. Kim began crying as he struggled against the claw that pinned him to the tree. Roy plunged his clawed hand into Kim's midsection and pulled out most of his intestines. He stuffed them into his mouth, which opened so wide it seemed his head was split in two. Kim coughed and thrashed, blood flying through his teeth in a tangle of spit. His vision blackened. The monster kept thrusting his hand into Kim, pulling out pieces and stuffing them into his mouth. Sorry, kids.